Trump is threatening India and China to stop buying Russian oil. But neither country is listening, and this is making him angry.
贸易战，中方必将奉陪到底。
The Chinese are tough negotiators.
What if I told you that, without a single headline, America recently lost almost all of its oil sales to the largest client in the world? New data released by the U.S. Energy Information Administration as of August 11th, 2025, shows a startling drop. From 160,000 barrels per day at the beginning of the year, crude exports to China had fallen to less than 8,000 barrels per day, a 95% delete. No angry declarations from Beijing. After a seemingly innocuous 10% levy in February, there was a lull until the tankers abruptly ceased arriving. The flow has reduced to a trickle from Gulf Coast pipelines to Texas ports, leaving billions of dollars in equipment stranded and exposing America's once proud energy superiority as a meaningless catchphrase. Whether we will ever be able to regain China is the matter at hand, not how we lost it. Keep checking back, hit like, and leave a comment underneath. From the ground, one can see the change. Whole berths that were formerly occupied by huge tankers are now unoccupied in Corpus Christi. Huge storage tanks in Houston that once turned over once a week is now sitting half full. In the Texas heat, steel shells are roasting. Only a small portion of the capacity of the pipelines intended to transport crude to Asia is being used. Rick Morales, who owns a logistics company that serves ports around the Gulf Coast, says, "I have been in this business for 27 years, and I have never seen the docks this quiet." Ships continued to move even in the midst of the financial crisis in 2008. This seems to be permanent. However, traffic has significantly slowed in Washington and the U.S. ports, and thousands of truck drivers and dock workers are increasingly concerned about their jobs. The president continues to have a very different perspective, telling reporters that this is all included in trade leverage as though 2018 were still the year. While oil exporting states watch their economy deteriorate, his administration is focusing its energies on ranting against wind power at rallies and fighting Canada over lumber levies. It's a double failure, losing the market and our reputation as a trustworthy provider, according to Senator Claire Du Bois of Louisiana, which is home to some of the biggest export-oriented refineries in the country. In order to meet Chinese demand, GF Coast ports increased their capacity by 25% between 2020 and 2024. New loading ports, pipeline connections, and offshore mooring systems were funded by billions of taxpayer dollars and private investment. However, China's tariff in February turned out to be the first step in a more comprehensive plan. Beijing secured a long-term supply within months. Agreements with Iran, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Russia. Importantly, the agreements provided secure volumes, competitive rates, and settlement in yuan rather than US dollars. It is a purposeful rewiring of the import system, similar to installing a new operating system that no longer runs the outdated software, according to Jake Peterson, an energy expert at the Global Policy Institute. The United States is not a section of the update. Price tags are just one aspect of that rewiring. Schedules for tankers have been revised. China's refineries have been redesigned to process heavier blends from the Middle East and Russia. Payment methods have changed to completely avoid using U.S. banks. Practically speaking, even if China no longer has the financial and physical infrastructure to accept American oil, which all of a sudden became the cheapest in the world. The shock has been devastating for small and mid-sized companies in the Gulf Coast oil supply chain, machine shops, chemical suppliers, and maritime services. The proprietor of a modest Port Arthur mechanical repair business, Luis Herrera, reports a 40% decline in sales. We used to service pumps in just 3 months, as well as valves for a minimum of 2 tankers every week. We are fortunate now if we receive 1 contract each month. Even farther inland, the ripple effects are felt. Idling rigs are trucking firms that use to transport refined and crude goods to export terminals. Port-related cafes and restaurants are reporting 20 to 30% drops in sales. Wait till you see who is taking our place if you believe that this is only a Texas issue. China is one of Russia's and Iran's largest clients. It purchases practically all of Iran's oil. We are discussing between 80 and 90% of Iran's oil exports. They travel to China. The pivot is shown by July Chinese customs statistics. A significant portion of Iran's imports, which have increased to 1.7 million barrels per day, 10 times the amount China previously purchased from the U.S., go to teapot refineries, which are agile private facilities that prioritize affordability and flexibility over provenance or documentation. According to market expert Yuan Lei of Shanghai, who spoke to official television CCTV, America believed that low pricing would maintain its position, but when the returning is practically impossible because contracts and infrastructure are designed for Middle Eastern and Russian crude. Even more important are the strategic ramifications. Washington's power to enforce sanctions, set trade conditions, or even keep an eye on flows is undermined by the fact that every barrel priced in yuan is a barrel that has no impact on the U.S. financial system. The former Treasury, according to official Marcus Bell, we are witnessing more than just a decline in the market. It is a creeping cut into the financial vein of American dominance, a shift of dollars. America's nearest neighbors are also taking action, both north and south of the border. Together, Mexico and Canada are developing the Northern Corridor, a $120 billion logistical network that will link their respective ports in the Pacific and the Atlantic. Avoid U.S. facilities completely. After it is finished, the United States will have less control over supply chains in North America, as more than $120 billion in yearly trade flows are rerouted. Former White House trade advisor Paul Kingston told Bloomberg the truth. This retaliation is not short-term. The United States is not invited to the new trade architecture that is being constructed. Phase of design. Other areas are already being impacted by that architecture. Yuan-based oil contracts are being negotiated by Indian refiners. Similar payment flexibility is being adopted by Southeast Asian buyers, ranging from Malaysia to Thailand, in order to obtain pricing advantages. Even buyers in Europe are utilizing the heightened competition among suppliers to demand longer payment periods and insurance exemptions from American exporters. It's gloomy on the Gulf Coast. Low-pressure pipelines in Louisiana, half-empty oil tanks in Houston, and closed logistical offices in Corpus Christi. Each narrates the same tale. The mechanics, the haulers, and even us bringing them lunch. The United States is no longer on China's updated list of energy contacts. In just a few months, the ports and pipelines that were constructed to serve the biggest buyer in the world have become useless assets. Additionally, now that a significant energy client has sought alternative providers, the question is not whether they will return, but rather what the U.S. will do next. The next chapter begins with the answer to that query, one in which the competitors of the United States are inking agreements that we cannot even see, much less control. By July 2025, a subtle yet profound change had completely established itself in worldwide markets for energy. Almost all of China's long-term contracts for crude oil with Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Russia were no longer valued in US dollars. They were settled in yuan after being signed and sealed. That can appear to be a small accounting decision on paper. In actuality, it is a steady, methodical cut into the American power's financial artery. Every barrel priced in yuan is one that never comes into contact with a dollar, never passes through American institutions, and is never subject to Washington's authority to set trade restrictions, issue penalties, or even monitor the transaction. And this is where the risk increases. Yuan establishes a standard for other commodities like liquid natural gas once it becomes the preferred currency for oil, gas, copper, and even the staple crops of American agriculture, maize and soybeans. Our banks aren't the only industry switching to yuan payments. It weakens the foundation of the dollar's hegemony. There is more to the petrodollar than just energy. It is the linchpin that keeps America's influence in international trade intact. When you take that away, the rest of the building begins to wobble. Because America's influence does not just diminish if the dollar is written out of the agreement. It is disappearing. That is not a side consequence for Beijing. That's the whole point. Iran took the back door after spotting the opportunity. With the help of its shadow fleet, a network of about 300 tankers flying false documents, Enthroned has been surreptitiously transporting millions of barrels into Chinese ports while continuously changing AIS signals. Many of those supplies wind up in the hands of China's teapot refineries, which are smaller, private businesses that prioritize pricing over politics. Chenming, a shipping broker in Shandong province, claims that they don't inquire as to whether it is illegal or crude. If it's inexpensive, they will accept it as they are not bound by the dollar. At a rally in Iowa during this currency mutiny, the man in the Oval Office called the yuan funny money. No one else in the world was laughing. Energy strategists from Bangkok to Brussels were referring to it as the new default, a framework for trading oil that does not rely on the currency. Previously, the United States, the dollar was the lifeblood of the world's economy. It isn't the most widely used payment method anymore. It's just another one. The story is revealed by the numbers. China now purchases 1.7 million barrels of Iranian crude per day, 10 times the amount it used to purchase from the U.S. by the middle of 2025. As stated according to data from the commodities analytics company Clay, more than 80% of those barrels are now settled in yuan or barter agreements involving industrial goods, completely circumventing regular finance channels. According to Dr. Anna Peterson, senior scholar at the Global Policy Institute, it is a purposeful evasion of U.S. authority. Washington's power is eroding, and the reaction, so denial, has been the norm thus far. The change has proven disastrous for exporters along the Gulf Coast. Houston's Corpus Christi export terminals, which were constructed and enlarged during the last 10 years to cater mostly to China, are currently operating at less than 40% of their full potential. According to port equipment expert Rick Morales, we refer to them as the priciest lawn ornaments in the world. Houston-based supplier. For a market that disappeared in 6 months, we spent billions building storage tanks, pipes, and docks. Schloch. Economists and traders concur with the White House's assertion that the U.S. can reroute shipments to South America, Europe, and India. China cannot be replaced. Not in price stability, not in volume, and not in strategic influence. According to former Treasury official Marcus Bell, this is not a supply chain problem. The business model is collapsing. Ego, poor math, and the idea that tariffs are like seasoning fuel this one. Continue adding more, and the flavor will improve. Small and medium-sized companies that depend on the ecology of oil exports are being squeezed. In Port Arthur, mechanical Luis Herrera, owner of a repair shop, reports that since April, orders have decreased by 45%. He acknowledges that he had to fire 3 men. These people have families and are excellent professionals. The labor stops when ships stop. Karen McBride, a truck fleet operator in Baytown, Texas, has parked over half of her trucks. Every day, we would transport crude from the pipeline terminals to the port. Perhaps twice a week now. The contracts are no longer in place, yet fuel prices are still high. In the meantime, China has strengthened its position rather than merely filling the void left by the U.S. Beijing's strategic petroleum reserves increased to more over 3 months' worth of imports by August 2025, much exceeding the International Energy AY's suggested amount. 90-day worldwide average. The suppliers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Russia, the usual suspects, were unwilling to answer U.S. calls. These reserves function as more than just a contingency fund. They are a tool for bargaining. China can withstand price shocks, disregard diplomatic pressure, and pit suppliers against one another when it has full tanks and long-term yuan-based contracts. Never turn your gaze to the Gulf of Mexico. The optics are bad for politics. In the same policy cycle, we have managed to enrich our biggest adversary, empower our biggest rival, and alienate our biggest customer. Louisiana Senator Claire Du Bois told reporters last week. That isn't a strategy. It's malpractice. Frustration is growing even among the corporate community. Before permanent infrastructure write-downs start, the American Petroleum Alliance called on the administration to act politically and commercially to re-establish access to important Asian markets in a statement released on August 8th. In the West Wing, however, the story is still one of triumph. The president informed the crowd that we are now again respected in Ohio, stating that partners will return to the table if one is difficult. On the ground, however, the data is contradictory. The dominance of American energy has been replaced by pipelines to nowhere. Industry insiders are now using this phrase as a sarcastic jest. It is not just oil that poses a strategic threat. The contracts that are valued in yuan are establishing a model for exporting copper, other commodities, liquefied natural gas, and even agricultural products. Should the dollar lose its pivotal position in several industries, Washington's capacity to economic statecraft will become less effective. All around,